In this video, I'll be explaining 6 different ways to manipulate the reps that you do in your sets in your workout. Given all this information, you can therefore alter your workout, specifically through altering your reps and using these to get more out of less weight potentially, which for muscle growth, that is exactly what you want. Because the less weight you can use to induce muscle growth, the lower the amount of stress you put on your body and your muscles, and therefore the quicker you will recover, the more you can work out. See where I'm getting? And in addition, certain kinds of reps will allow you to train more specifically to certain goals that you want to achieve, and potentially harder goals. And so the first one is training to failure. Pretty simple concept. You push the set until you cannot perform the rep to completion. And the thing with training to failure is that many people have different definitions of what failure constitutes as. There's, for one, the technical camp, which is like, if you can't do another rep with the same incorrect form, then you're at failure. And there's another camp which is like, more like, if you can't do anything to get the rep up, then you're at failure. And personally, I think it's the best if you stick in the middle. I would say there's more to failure than just hitting technical failure, right? For barbell rows, or for any rows, like cable rows or anything, if I can't pull the bar or implement to my chest anymore, does that mean I'm done? I mean, my back's not really fatigued yet, but I can't do that anymore, so am I done? I would say you're not done yet. You can still keep pushing, you can still pull, but not to that same extent, but you can still pull. You can still fatigue your back muscles. But at the same time, you don't want the set to devolve to just cheating the rep into get the rep, In general, I think training to failure should look like your last rep should be at least twice as long in length in terms of time to complete the rep as your first rep. So say if your first rep took 1 second to complete, then your last rep should be at least 2 seconds. More than training to failure, you can actually go past failure by using some of the other rep manipulation techniques that I'll be explaining later in the video. So another kind of rep manipulation is termed explosive reps. And so basically all this means is just lifting weights fast, pushing fast, pulling fast, squatting fast, deadlifting fast, just fast. And so the concept of power, which is basically strength times speed, does not necessarily come all from strength, because it's strength times speed, so there's speed involved in power. So if you want to develop power, which is basically just explosiveness, you want to do explosive reps. And so explosive reps mainly expedite the concentric phase of the lift, and so that's basically when you're actively pushing something or pulling something. And most of the time, these reps, while emphasizing the concentric, will have a shortened eccentric. So if I'm doing explosive bench press reps, I'm going to explode on the way up, and then maybe I'm not going to really pay much attention to the lowering down. Although for bench press specifically, you should. And the trick with explosive reps is to pick a lighter weight, so that you can train the speed element specifically, because power equals strength times speed. And so the heavier you go, the less you will be able to accelerate the weight, and therefore the less fast it will be. Just kind of duh. So I would recommend 50 to 70% of your 1 rep max to use to train specifically for explosive reps. And that may seem to not be that much, but when you're training explosively, 50% of your 1 rep max is plenty. On the other hand, explosive reps are going to be very tiring. And the thing is, they aren't going to be the best for hypertrophy, because you're emphasizing the concentric while minimizing the eccentric. And with hypertrophy, the best source of hypertrophy are eccentric reps, are the reps that emphasize the eccentric. And in addition, with explosive reps, the time it's going to take you to complete the set is going to be much faster than a standard hypertrophy set, due to the nature of being explosive. However, if you modify explosive reps with a lengthened eccentric, basically exploding up but then lengthening the eccentric time, that can be a great stimulus for muscle growth. So the combination of lengthened eccentrics with explosive concentrics can be very good. And speaking of which, the next manipulation is eccentric reps. These are reps that focus on the lowering or the eccentric part of the rep. It's where the muscle that is under load is lengthening. Think of lowering the bar onto your chest when you're doing a bench press, or lowering a dumbbell during a curl. That's the eccentric part. And so eccentrics actually cause more muscle growth as compared to the concentric motions, which is certainly why many bodybuilders will dedicate more time to the eccentric as compared to the concentric portion. Not to mention that the eccentric portions of a lift are much stronger than the concentric. This is really variable between people, but as an estimate, you could probably expect like 20 to 30% stronger on an eccentric as compared to the concentric, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. And so certain exercises take advantage of the eccentric to give explosive growth, which is kind of ironic. So for example, the Romanian deadlift is mainly an eccentric lift, where you slowly lengthen your hamstrings until they are stretched maximally, right? And then you contract your hamstrings and hips to bring them back into starting position, but the main goal is the lengthening of your hamstrings. And so this stimulates and induces micro tears more than a concentric focused exercise like hamstring curls specifically, because with hamstring curls you're actively like contracting your hamstrings. With RDL you are actively lengthening it. And not to mention that the stretch that you get from the RDL is absolutely killer, and that stretching muscles during reps, which is also called stretch-mediated hypertrophy, is very effective at inducing hypertrophy. I mean, given the name, stretch-mediated hypertrophy, right? And getting the stretch on muscles, that is when the muscle has the least mechanical advantage, or in other terms, is the weakest. And so therefore, if you target that aspect of it, you will induce more damage, and therefore you will induce more growth. So the fourth on the list are isometrics, and these are reps that don't use any motion, or don't have any motion whatsoever to them. You can think of a plank. That is an isometric movement. You're not moving anything, you're just contracting and you're holding it. Isometrics, for the most part, are not very conducive to hypertrophy. However, isometric exercises can produce more force than eccentrics. So they aren't the best for hypertrophy, but they can be used. Like, for example, on a deadlift, you can load up weight that you know you can't pull up. Like, you can load up on weight that you know for sure that you can't pull. For example, you can add like 3 plates to your 1 rep max of a deadlift. Like, you know you're not going to pull it, but you can use it for an isometric contraction instead. So what you would be doing is basically you would have the weight that you know you can't pull, and then you would basically try to pull it anyway. You would just get in that position, you would still pull, and because you're not moving, it's technically an isometric contraction. And so you would just be there just trying to pull this thing for a pretty long time. And so this is going to be much longer than like any normal rep. Think about more along the lines of like a minute and higher. And so these can be very useful for like priming your CNS, your central nervous system, so that you're prepared for the weights you'll be using during the rest of the workout. So you can like do a maximal isometric contraction that you know you're not going to actually do. And then after that, you can go into working sets of deadlifts, or you can go to your 1 rep max if you choose to. It is basically used to sort of prime your central nervous system, basically, because what happens is, because you've attempted something much heavier than your supposed 1 rep max, the 1 rep max will feel relatively lighter, even though it's your 1 rep max, right? But it will feel lighter, and you may actually be able to get it up better if you hadn't primed your body first. In addition, going back to training past failure, you can use isometrics after your last rep, and you can just hold that contraction, especially in gymnastics and calisthenics. Isometric holds comprise a lot of the skills: planche, front lever, back lever, iron cross, handstand, human flag. Like, all of these are isometric movements with minimal movement besides just stabilizing. And in my opinion, they are cool as fuck, but they are isometric movements. Right. So next, there are paused reps. And so these are mostly used in strength applications, but can also be used for hypertrophy. You can think of paused reps as basically adding a slight isometric to any exercise in a specific rep. For example, you can pause the bar at your t-shirt during your bench press, and that will basically turn it into a spotter press instead, and that will induce more gains than if you were to not pause at all. So a spotter press specifically is you pause the bench on your t-shirt or in your chest for 1 second, and then you press back up. You will get more gains because you're limiting how much momentum is helping you, right? And therefore that makes your muscles work harder. So if you do pauses, expect to not be able to lift as much weight. It's just the reality. In addition, for the bench press specifically, you may find that your chest is stretched for longer at the bottom, which, as I've already said, the stretch median hypertrophy will get you more gains than if you did not do that. So for a strength background, pause reps can help with weak points specifically. Like for example, let's say you are a power lifter and are having trouble at the bottom of a deadlift. Okay, so what do? You train the bottom of the deadlift with pauses. So you do deadlift, and then you lift it slightly up the ground. So you're holding the bar, right? It's slightly off the ground. You just pause there for 1 to 3 seconds, and then you do the rest of the rep, right? So that's adding a pause to a rep. So this emphasizes the part that's weakest, and therefore you get stronger at that part. The final manipulation I have for you are partial reps. These are what they sound like. They are partial reps. And you're going to say, no, I'm on team full ROM, yeah. And I don't argue with you, but partials have their place. For example, if you just did a set to failure, you can add partials on top of it, right? To get even more, to go past failure. However, this is just the basics of partials. Using partial range of motion can be useful depending on the exercise. I mean this as in only doing partial reps for all of your reps for that set, for that exercise. So for example, the preacher curl, at the bottom of the preacher curl, it isn't really all that stimulatory. You aren't getting a stretch on your biceps really, and instead you're putting yourself at a mechanically disadvantaged spot. And so you could do reps that only get your arm parallel and then come back up. And so this makes your biceps work constantly and can be great stimulating for growth. So in general, for partials, you can select which ranges of motion you want to do, and therefore to get the best stimulus from it. And so all in all, these manipulations are simply additions that you can add, and at the end of the day, your base is still the most important thing. The reps you do without any rep manipulation, without any of this fancy stuff, are your bread and butter. They are driving your gains the most. These are methods simply to squeeze more, but they're ultimately an addition. They are the cherry on top, and don't mix this up. So if you've learned something, give me a like, subscribe, and a kiss.